Imagine waking up one day, but not as yourself. Not the version of you that you once knew in your quietest childhood moments. Not the one who used to laugh without needing a drink, or the one who could sit in silence without scrolling, smoking, or swallowing something. You wake up as a shadow, walking, talking, working, even loving on the surface. But beneath that, you've been hollowed out and replaced by something else. And the most terrifying part? You don't even realize it. You feel like you're still you, but your habits speak louder than your intentions. Your cravings speak louder than your memories. Your impulses have replaced your values. What if your identity wasn't really yours anymore? What if your favorite foods, your music, your stress relievers, your beliefs about life, your reactions to pain, your sense of humor, your circle of friends, even your morning routine, were all just echoes of a silent force that had taken root long ago? Not a demon, not a disease, something far more insidious. Addiction, not just to substances, but to validation, to achievement, to approval, to drama, to chaos, to control, to comfort, to distraction, to suffering itself. Addiction doesn't always look like a needle or a bottle. Sometimes it looks like a calendar full of meetings you hate attending but can't stop scheduling. Sometimes it looks like checking your phone 37 times an hour, convinced you're just staying informed. Sometimes it looks like falling in love with people who never truly see you again and again, because deep down, a part of you is addicted to being unseen. And here's the question no one wants to ask. Where do you end and your addiction begin? Is the part of you that craves sugar when you're lonely really you? Is the part that lashes out when you're ignored really you? Is the part that reaches for the vape, the binge, the purchase, the tweet, the argument, the porn, the coffee, the chaos actually you? Or have these reflexes become a mask that even you forgot you were wearing? Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." So ask yourself, have you mistaken your coping mechanisms for your character? Have you built a personality out of pain avoidance strategies? Have you let your comforts become your cage? Because here's the real tragedy. Addiction doesn't just affect you, it slowly becomes you, and you don't even notice. It shapes your voice, your posture, your relationships, your priorities. It disguises itself as just who I am, until one day someone close to you whispers, "You've changed," and you don't know whether to thank them or break down in terror. But what if the scariest part of addiction isn't the cravings, but the erasure of the self? What if, in the quiet hours of the night, it's not the withdrawal that haunts you, but the silence where your true identity used to be? What if you've built your friendships, your career, your love life, your sense of purpose, on foundations laid by something that doesn't even want you to be free? How do you fight something that feels like it is you? You can't kill it because it hides behind your smile. You can't reject it because it sounds like your inner voice. You can't abandon it because it lives in your decisions, your rituals, your language. And so you begin to wonder, am I truly alive? Or just performing a version of myself that my addictions have rehearsed for years? This isn't just a bad habit. This is an identity heist, a slow, methodical possession. And most terrifying of all, you volunteered for it. Not all at once, but in small ways. A little permission here, a little numbness there, until the mask fused to your skin, until you forgot what it was like to breathe without it. But it wasn't always like this. There was a time when you could feel everything. There was a time when you didn't need anything outside yourself to feel okay. That version of you still exists, buried, dormant, waiting. So the real question becomes, how did we get here? What force is powerful enough to rewrite your identity without your consent, without you even noticing? And more importantly, is it possible to come back from it? That's what we'll explore next. But first, sit with this. You are not your cravings, you are not your compulsions, you are not your comforts, and you are not your past. You are the awareness beneath it all. The question is, can you remember who you were before the world taught you to forget? Let's go deeper. Because the roots of addiction don't begin with the drug, the phone, the relationship, or the dopamine hit. They begin in the mind, in that private, haunted theater where your thoughts loop endlessly, quietly building the identity you wear like skin. But here's the paradox. We are told addiction is about pleasure, but it's more often about escape, not the pursuit of joy, but the dull ache of avoidance. Avoidance of pain, of silence, of rejection, of failure, of the terrifying task of becoming fully conscious. Addiction, as Carl Jung warned, is often a spiritual problem, a stand-in for a meaning we've lost and a self we've never fully met. All neurosis is a substitute for legitimate suffering, Jung said. And addiction is exactly that, a substitute for real suffering, a detour, a counterfeit relief. We reach for the substance or the distraction not to feel good, but to avoid feeling at all. But why? Why does feeling, especially feeling pain, threaten us so deeply? To understand this, we have to return to a place many of us have buried: childhood. In childhood, every feeling was real, raw, unfiltered. There was no internal editor yet, only instinct and impression. When you were afraid, you cried. When you were abandoned, you panicked. When you were unseen, your body learned to shrink or perform. And most importantly, when you were in pain and no one came to help, you learned that your pain was unwelcome, so you found a way to silence it. At first, that silencing may have looked innocent: daydreaming, overeating, pleasing others to feel safe. Later, it evolved into substances, into hyperachievement, into toxic relationships, into numbing rituals, into overthinking, overgiving, overworking. All of it was rooted in one thing. You didn't feel safe being you, and the mind, desperate for survival, built a coping identity around that fear. It whispered, if I can't be loved for who I am, maybe I can be accepted for what I do. If I can't be safe in stillness, maybe I can stay busy enough to outrun the silence. If I can't be healed, maybe I can at least be numb. These beliefs aren't conscious. They're deeper than thought. They're written into your nervous system like ancient code. Philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre once wrote, "Man is nothing else but what he makes of himself." But here's the problem. You didn't entirely make yourself. You adapted yourself to survive. So what you call your identity, your personality, your preferences, your lifestyle, might actually be a defense mechanism wearing a name tag. And addiction? It becomes the glue holding that false identity together. Because if you remove the addiction, what would be left? The real you, or a void you've been avoiding for decades? Here's where the existential knife cuts deepest. We are not just addicted to substances. We are addicted to the selves those substances allow us to perform. The confident self who drinks just enough to socialize. The lovable self who gives endlessly to feel wanted. The productive self who works 60-hour weeks to feel worthy. The rebellious self who smokes to feel dangerous. The spiritual self who meditates obsessively to feel above the chaos. Addiction, in this view, becomes not just a chemical dependency, but a psychological performance, a play where the substance is the prop, and the self is the actor who no longer knows they're on stage. And the audience? Society, friends, family, social media followers, even your therapist. Everyone cheering for a version of you that never felt real. This is where Viktor Frankl's insight cuts through the fog. As a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, he observed that the deepest human drive isn't pleasure or even power, it's meaning. When a person can't find a deep sense of meaning, he said, they distract themselves with pleasure. Pleasure becomes a placeholder. Addiction becomes an anesthetic, because meaning requires presence, and presence requires pain. But our culture trains us to fear pain. From the moment we are born, we are taught to outsource discomfort. A child cries. Give them a screen. A teen feels anxious. Label them. An adult feels grief. Medicate them. A person feels existential despair. Entertain them. We live in a world that treats pain as a glitch in the matrix, not a signpost toward growth. And so, addiction thrives, not just in broken homes or tragic stories, but in ordinary, high-functioning lives. In boardrooms, in marriages, in college dorms, in places where pain is politely hidden behind achievement. Here's what nobody tells you. Addiction doesn't feed on weakness. It feeds on disconnection. Disconnection from your emotions, disconnection from your body, disconnection from nature, disconnection from meaning, disconnection from other people, and ultimately from yourself. So ask yourself, when did you last sit in silence without reaching for something? When did you last feel pain and simply felt it without sedating it? When did you last express the truth? Not the filtered truth, but the vulnerable, messy, human truth. If you don't remember, that's not failure. That's a clue. A clue that your addiction may not be just about the thing you're using, but about the self you're running from. And if that's true, then the real question is no longer, how do I quit? It's, what was so unbearable that I needed to forget myself just to survive? That's where the healing begins. But first, we must confront what happens when we don't. Because the consequences are not just personal, they're societal, systemic, invisible, and they're far worse than we think. There's a strange kind of silence in modern life. Not the calming kind, not the stillness of a quiet forest or the hush before a revelation. It's the silence of resignation, the silence in the face of a life half-lived, a marriage where no one talks anymore, but no one leaves either. A job that drains you but pays just enough to keep you numb. A body that aches but you've normalized the discomfort. A mind full of noise but nothing meaningful ever gets heard. This is what happens when addiction isn't just present, but normalized. When it doesn't just live in dark alleys or ERs, but in the apps on your phone, the habits in your day, the rituals in your relationships. We think of addiction as extreme, but the truth is, it thrives in the middle, in routine, in comfort, in compromise. The man who drinks just a little every night to wind down, the woman who checks her likes before she even opens her eyes, the couple who can't be in the same room without the TV on, the teenager who's never been bored without panicking. These aren't anomalies, these are symptoms of a world trained to escape itself, and slowly, these escapes become the architecture of our existence. Your brain doesn't just adapt to pleasure, it rewires itself to expect it. Every dopamine hit, every avoidance ritual, every cycle of relief becomes a neural loop, strengthening itself through repetition like a groove carved in stone by water. The limbic system, the emotional core of your brain, learns what brings comfort. The prefrontal cortex, the rational part, starts handing over control. And over time, the line between choice and compulsion begins to blur. This isn't theoretical, neuroscience confirms it. The more we repeat a behavior, especially one linked to emotional relief, the more it embeds itself into the architecture of the self. That's why addiction isn't just a habit, it's a rehearsed identity, one your brain is rewarded for enacting. And while you perform it on the outside, something quieter happens inside. You forget who you were before the performance began. This amnesia has consequences, far beyond the personal. On a societal level, addiction shapes the very structures we live within. It fuels economies. Entire industries depend on your continued disconnection. Think about it. If you weren't addicted to consumption, would advertising even work? If you weren't addicted to productivity, would burnout be a badge of honor? If you weren't addicted to comparison, would social media be profitable? If you weren't addicted to comfort, would convenience be worshipped? Addiction is not just a glitch in the system. It is the system, a self-reinforcing feedback loop between your pain and the market's profit. And here's where the tragedy deepens. You may believe your choices are free, but when addiction guides them, freedom becomes an illusion wrapped in routine. You choose the job you hate to fund the lifestyle that numbs you from the job you hate. You choose the relationship that wounds you because loneliness feels more unbearable. You choose the substance that calms your anxiety, even though it causes the anxiety. You choose the scrolling over the silence, even though the silence is the only place you hear. Or truth can be heard. You become the architect of your own prison, and the worst part. You decorate the cell. You call it just how I am. You laugh off your compulsions. You wear your dysfunction like a costume at a masquerade ball where everyone is pretending not to be in pain. But deep down, you know. You feel it in your body, in the tension behind your eyes, in the ache in your chest when you're alone, in the way sleep never feels restful anymore, in the way your passions feel more like chores, in the way you keep asking yourself, is this all there is? This is the invisible erosion, the quiet decay of authenticity, the slow burn of unprocessed pain turned into performance. It's not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It just drains you day by day until you wake up wondering when exactly you disappeared. And in that silence, addiction offers itself again. Here, it says, feel something. Forget something. Escape. Not because it's evil, but because it works. And that's the horror. It works. For a while. Until it doesn't. Until the high costs arrive. The relationships that collapse under the weight of your absence. The health that breaks beneath years of silent self-abandonment. The creativity that rusts from lack of expression. The opportunities missed because you were too numb to see them. And then, if you're lucky, comes the moment of confrontation. The moment you see your reflection and realize you no longer recognize it. The moment you speak and the voice sounds like a stranger. The moment someone asks you what you want and you don't have an answer. Because addiction didn't just steal your energy or your focus or your health. It stole your capacity to desire without distortion. It taught you to want comfort over courage, control over connection, escape over embodiment, safety over selfhood. And now you stand in the ruins of what was once your becoming. But this moment, this devastation, is not the end. It's the beginning. Because for the first time, you are awake. You see the bars. You hear the whispers that guided your life. You feel the dissonance between who you are and who you've become. And now, the question emerges from the ashes. What would it look like to rebel? Not against the world, not against the addiction, but against the false self it constructed. The mask, the identity, the performance. What would it look like to stop escaping and start reclaiming? That's what we'll explore next. Because beyond the trap lies a door, and the key has been in your hands all along. Rebellion doesn't begin with rage. It begins with honesty. Not the kind of honesty you post online, polished and poetic. Not the kind of truth you confess after a few drinks, but the kind that shakes you. The kind that strips you bare in the mirror. The kind that forces you to whisper, I don't know who I am anymore. That's the first act of rebellion. To admit you've been asleep. To recognize the mask you've worn for years. To accept that the life you've built may not have been constructed by your soul, but by your survival patterns. It's painful, but pain, as the Stoics knew, is a compass. It points toward what matters. The wound is the place where the light enters you, Rumi said. To break free from addiction, you don't start with willpower, you start with awareness. You start by witnessing the self you've been performing, and then, slowly, bravely, you begin to dismantle it. Step 1. Call it what it is. Not my bad habit. Not my little indulgence. Not just how I cope. No. Call it an identity hijacking. Call it a psychological parasite. Call it a rehearsal of pain disguised as pleasure. Because when you name something truthfully, you remove its power to hide. Step 2. Sit in the discomfort. This is where most people turn back. Because without the addiction, without the scrolling, smoking, drinking, gambling, working, people-pleasing, you'll feel it. The void. The thing you were trying to avoid in the first place. The ache of unmet needs. The echoes of abandonment. The grief of lost years. The terror of being present in a world that never taught you how to be still. But here's the secret. The void isn't empty. It's full of everything you've never allowed yourself to feel. And on the other side of that feeling, freedom. Not the temporary kind, not the high, not the relief, but the kind of freedom that feels like remembering who you were before the world told you to be someone else. You don't escape addiction by running. You escape it by facing what it helped you escape, by grieving, by raging, by telling the truth, by learning to sit in silence until your real voice comes back. Step 3. Reclaim your desires. Addiction feeds on distorted desire. It convinces you to want what numbs you, what empties you, what flatters the mask. To rebel is to retrain your wanting, to ask yourself every day, what do I truly need, not what I've been conditioned to crave? Who am I beneath the performance? What makes me feel whole, not high? It will feel unnatural at first. You won't trust your own answers. That's okay, because you've spent years wanting through the lens of pain. Now you're learning to want through the lens of presence. Step 4. Build rituals, not routines. Addiction thrives in autopilot. Healing lives in ritual. A ritual isn't just an action. It's an intention anchored in time. It could be 5 minutes of breathwork before you reach for your phone. It could be writing 1 page of truth before you scroll. It could be walking in silence without music, letting your mind detox from noise. Rituals return you to yourself. They rewire the loop. They teach your nervous system that presence can be safe again. Step 5. Seek, meaning not just sobriety. This is where most recovery journeys fail. They aim for absence, the absence of the drug, the habit, the compulsion. But absence isn't enough. The human psyche needs presence. It needs purpose. It needs to move toward something. That's why Viktor Frankl emphasized meaning as the ultimate antidote. Those who have a why to live, he wrote, can bear almost any how. So what is your why? Not your job, not your goals, not your image, your soul's why. What lights you up? What breaks your heart in a way that demands action? What would you do if no one was watching? Reclaiming your identity means reconnecting with a reason to be alive that doesn't require a mask. And here's the final truth. You are not powerless. That's the lie addiction whispers. You'll never change. This is just who you are. You'll always need me. But that's not your voice. That's the echo of your pain, still playing old tapes. You are not broken. You are buried. Beneath the cravings, beneath the compulsions, beneath the comfort-seeking reflex, there is a witness, a self untouched by trauma, a self who remembers, a self who can choose. And you don't need to become someone new. You need to return to your body, to your breath, to your truth, to your inner authority. You will lose people along the way. You'll lose habits, identities, relationships, illusions. Let them go. Because you are not here to live addicted to your own disappearance. You are here to wake up. And waking up is the most rebellious act in a world that profits from your sleep. There comes a moment, usually in silence, when you realize you are not who you thought you were. Not the addict, not the achiever, not the good one, the broken one, the busy one, the lost one. You are something before all of that. Something more ancient, more whole, more true. This realization doesn't come like a lightning bolt. It arrives softly, like a whisper that cuts louder than any scream. You were never your addiction. You were simply forgetting. For years you've tried to fix yourself, tried to fight the cravings, manage the symptoms, tweak the behaviors. But what if the goal was never to fix you? What if the only thing ever broken was the belief that you were? Addiction becomes your identity not because you're weak, but because you're human. And the human condition is forgetfulness. We forget the truth of who we are. We forget that presence is enough. We forget that pain is survivable. We forget that we were once whole before the world named us. The ultimate truth is this: addiction is not a malfunction, it's a message. It says, there is something inside you still unfelt, still unloved, still unseen. The substance, the scrolling, the seduction, it's all noise trying to drown out that message. But when the noise stops, when you finally sit with the ache, when you no longer run, you can hear it. And in that moment, something shifts. You stop seeing yourself as a battlefield and start seeing yourself as a home. A place where pain can visit but doesn't have to stay. A place where no emotion is exiled. A place where the self isn't a performance, but a presence. Do you understand the weight of that? You are not here to be perfect. You are here to be present. And in presence, there is no addiction strong enough to define you. Let's be clear. This doesn't mean the cravings vanish. This isn't a Hollywood ending. Healing isn't neat. It's sacred. And sacredness is always messy. You'll still reach. You'll still falter. You'll still have moments where the old self knocks on the door, pretending to be you. But now, you see it. And seeing is everything. Because the self who sees is the self who is free. Friedrich Nietzsche once said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how. But there's something deeper. He who remembers who he is no longer needs to bear anything at all. He simply chooses truth over comfort, chooses awareness over anesthesia, chooses aliveness over approval. That is freedom, not in the way the world sells it, but in the way your soul remembers it. Freedom is not the absence of struggle, it is the refusal to be defined by it. And that's what this journey is, not a recovery, but a return. Return to the child before the masks. Return to the breath before the panic. Return to the moment before you learn to numb yourself just to be accepted. You do not need a new identity. You need to shed the false one, the one built by fear and scarcity and social survival. The one that said, you are your addiction, you are your trauma, you are your pain. That voice, it never belonged to you. Let it go. Let it burn in the fire of your self-awareness. Let it dissolve in the stillness of your breath. Let it drown in the ocean of your truth. Because underneath it all, there is a voice that has waited patiently. It speaks not in fear, but in love. It says, I remember you. I have always remembered you. You are not the wound. You are the healer. You are not the hunger. You are the witness. You are not the craving. You are the consciousness that chooses. This is not poetic metaphor. This is your essence. And when you live from that place, you realize the final, most powerful truth of all. You were never addicted to a substance. You were addicted to a story. And you can rewrite it today. Because the pen is in your hand now, no longer guided by compulsion, no longer dictated by shame, no longer edited by survival. You are the author, the protagonist, the witness, the rebel, the returner. You can choose to remember, to rebuild, to reclaim. And you don't have to do it perfectly. You just have to do it honestly. That is enough, more than enough. And as you close this chapter, not in the script but in your life, there is one final question I'll leave with you. If you stopped being who the world conditioned you to be, who might you finally become? That answer isn't found in any substance, screen, or system. It lives in you, and it always has. Welcome back.